All right, it's 1 o'clock on the dot, so I think we're going to go ahead and start. So my name is Joe Baumann. I am an assistant professor of English here at St. Charles Community College and the chair of the English department. Good afternoon, and thank you all for coming to this session of the 2022 Democracy Days titled The Prose and Poetry of Protest. But if I know these people over here, it's going to be heavy on the prose, light on the poetry. Well, actually, I'll get back to that. I would also like to give a quick shout out to reference librarian Julia Wilbers. She knows why, even though she's not here. She'll see this later. This is the 5th hosting of this particular panel, and I'd like to begin with just a brief introduction of what we're going to be doing today. Several students from 2 of our creative writing classes, English 206, Fiction Writing, and English 250, Advanced Creative Writing, will be sharing pieces of writing they have been working on prompted by the notion of protest. Some of them might simply be inspired by the word, others engaging directly with the political climate of contemporary America, others might exist somewhere in between. I haven't actually read or seen anything these writers have created for this panel, so I wouldn't be surprised if we get quite a bit of that somewhere in between. Before I turn the microphone over to our first reader, however, I would like to give a very brief history of writing as protest. There's no denying that we live in an age of protest. While protest has been part of the American and world landscape for centuries, millennia, and eons, it is clear that more and more members of the public at large have taken up the task of marching, striking, and shouting against injustice and imbalance, however it is that individuals define those things. Whether it's in response to Wall Street greed, political misbehavior, or abuse by those in positions of power, protest has taken on an omnipresent place in the American landscape. There's no denying that. That said, today we are here to speak of a different kind of protest, one that does not occur on the street or at the foot of a Capitol building, but one that comes to life on the printed page, in bestsellers or on websites, or in the glossy folds of magazines and newsprint, the writing of protest. These days, it isn't surprising to see a writer get political, but this politicizing of writing is hardly new. Ever since the written word has existed, it has been used as a form of protest. The earliest Greek writers, from Sappho to Aristophanes to even Homer, utilized their poetry as a way to rally against kings and overlords. Shakespeare, the bard himself, wrote scathing sonnets and plays as a way to mock and question the positions taken up by the British monarchy. Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal, even, in which he satirically suggests the eating of children as a way to survive the potato famine that plagued Ireland in the 18th century, can be viewed as a form of parodizing protest. His message, clearly, is that every solution those in power have come up with is so stupid we might as well eat our kids instead. And in America, writers like Jesmyn Ward, Alice Walker, Yosef Komunyakaa, Joseph Cassara, Amiri Baraka, Gloria Anzaldúa, Imani Perry, Natasha Trethewey, Joy Harjo, Margot Jefferson, Ibram X. Kendi, David Truer, Howard Zinn, Aminata Forna, Barbara Ransby, Lillian Smith, and Karen Ishizuki, just to name a few, have spent their lives and their entire writing careers protesting marginalization, subjugation, and inequities that are at the heart of our country's function and founding and day-to-day life. As Mona Ethaway says, it is the writer's job to tell society what it pretends it doesn't know. Contemporary writing, and I use this term to encompass not just fiction, nonfiction, and poetry, but song lyrics, theatrical scripts, and screenplays for film and television, has embraced protest as one of its major purposes. Dozens of literary journals and anthologies exist that respond to presidential and legislative activities and behaviors, as well as forms of institutional and large-scale prejudice when it comes to race, gender, sexuality, and more. American Horror Story even took up the 2016 election as a subject, exaggerating the grotesquerie that is the American political landscape. Some people complained that Star Wars Rogue One painted its evil empire as too similar to a particular political party's leadership. As the 2020s see a revolting rise in book banning and the silencing of marginalized voices, writers have struck out louder and louder in response to the notion that artists should be non-political. Ask any writer to do so and they might laugh or look puzzled. Removing the politic, the protestation, from art is all but impossible. I frequently see people demanding that athletes, commentators, public figures, celebrities, etc. stop getting political, and I find such a request hard to understand. As members of a country that values its freedoms, speech, assembly, to be religious or to be free from religion, it is incumbent upon all of us to speak when using whatever vehicles and microphones we have available to us. For writers, the megaphone is the pen. Our voices are words. As I mentioned at the beginning, today several students will share their own protest writing. Each will be reading a piece of their own creation with you, and afterward, we will have some time for questions. But I ask that these questions be limited to a discussion of the writing process, the writer's work, or how our writers view their art as having a place in protest. While discussions of various specific political positions is fruitful and important, that's not the focus of this particular panel today. But before I turn the microphone over to that reader, I'm going to read something not of my own creation. Several years ago, I was invited to speak at SCC's commencement as the president of the Faculty Association, and I read this poem because I thought that it was a celebration of what educators and students do together. But in light of a variety of things in the last several years, it's taken on a new complexion for me, and I think it's appropriate for this panel. So this is a poem called Teaching English from an Old Composition Notebook by Gary Soto. My chalk is no longer than a chip of fingernail, chip by which I must explain this Monday night the verbs to get, to wear, to cut. I'm not given much. These tired students, knuckle-wrapped from work as roofers, sour from scrubbing toilets and pedestal sinks. I'm given this room with 5 windows, a coffee machine, a piano with busted strings, the music of how we feel as the sun falls, exhausted from keeping up. I stand at the blackboard. The chalk is worn to a hangnail, nearly gone, the dust of some educational bone. By and by, I'm Cantiflas, the comic busybody in front. I say, I get the coffee. I pick up a coffee cup and sip. I click my heels and say, I wear my shoes. I bring an invisible fork to my mouth and say, I eat the chicken. Suddenly, the class is alive. Each one putting on hats and shoes, drinking sodas and beers, cutting flowers and steaks, a pantomime of sumptuous living. At break, I pass out cookies. Augustine the Guatemalan asks in Spanish, "Teacher, what is tally-ho?" I look at the word in the composition book. I raise my face to the bare bulb for a blind answer. I stutter, then say, "Es como adelante." Augustine smiles, then nudges a friend in the next desk, now smarter by one word. After the cookies are eaten, we move ahead to prepositions, under, over, and between. Useful words when La Migra opens the doors of their idling vans. At 10 to 9, I'm tired of acting, and they're tired of their roles. When class ends, I clap my hands of chalk dust, and 2 students applaud, thinking it's a new verb. I tell them adelante, and they pick up their old books. They smile and in return cry tally-ho as they head for the door. So I am going to now invite our first reader up to the stage, Loria Harris. Come on up. Or you're on the stage. All right.
This piece is called Occupy. Thumph. I rocked Jason's body away from mine. The smell of Jim Beam, the sticky layer of sweat forming all over my skin from the heat in the kitchen. I couldn't breathe. What the piss, Lisa? He slaps across my face with his open hand, making my eyeball try to jump sides. A milky yellow floods my vision as I grapple across the room to find the car keys. I just need to kiss my lovey-dovey wifey. His leathery lips pucker as he reaches for me again. I have the keys now, and I dash for the door. The crickets chirp in off-key harmony as I jump in our black Toyota, squinting to see in the night. He bangs on the hood as I light up R on the gear shift and spew gravel at his spitting mouth. My fingers are shaking, but I rake them through my dark hair, peeling it off my neck. Fumbling for the knob, I turn on the radio, and it serenades me. I don't know how you do what you do. I'm so in love with you. It just keeps getting better. A single salty tear burns my eye as it drools down my cheek. Why does he come home and ambush me like that, I wonder? Every few weeks after he's been gone for the evening, he'll come home, reeking of alcohol, and demand my affection. Not even my sex, but my affection. He'll say, no, kiss me like you mean it, or I just need you to really hold me and not release me for a solid 60 seconds. I never have any other option, and I bristle from the feeling of his rough, calloused hands surprising my goosebumpy arms, even on a good day. I don't know where I'm driving, but I keep going, turning right on Main. A neon sign glows green from the brick tavern turned church building. God's plan. God's plan. God's plan. I think of my mom. I could call her. She'll have all the answers, everything I need to fix about myself to make God's plan work for me and Jason. I could call my sister. She'll have marijuana. Maybe that could be God's plan for tonight. Smoky haze permeates the air. My sister Amy is laughing next to me on the couch, holding her stomach. The heaviness of my head tells me not to move it, but I do. I look at her. I laugh a little too. I don't know what's funny, though. When I look up at the ceiling, the picture frame from the wall is floating on it, and I wonder how that got there. Amy, why do you put pictures on the ceiling? I muster the words. She just keeps laughing. I close my eyes instead and try to drift off. Still aware of the room around me, I become encased in a bouncy ball. I bounce around the room, my eyes closed, and I realize I'm floating in liquid inside the bouncy ball. I reach out to touch the skin of it, and it wiggles from my touch, soft and flimsy. It's not rubber, it's a sack. I wake up in the morning to the salty scent of bacon on my tongue. My stomach's purring at me, begging. I stumble into the kitchen and see Amy, her blonde hair already curled and bouncy, spatula in hand. Good morning, she says. She seems too smiley to even contain herself. I don't remember what it's like to be single. Wow, you have energy. I rub my eyes and try to stretch my back without losing my balance. I have work in half an hour. Touché. I also don't remember what it's like to work 5 days a week. She serves us each a plate, eggs, bacon, and toast. I feel as if I could devour it in 2 seconds, but I try to pace myself. You doing any better this morning, she asks. I don't know. I shovel eggs onto the toast, then into my mouth. But how have you been? How's your health? It's hit or miss, like always, but I've been okay, and I feel good today. That's good to hear. I think you're doing the best of both of us right now. I don't know about that. All I know is I wish I had someone coming home at night who couldn't keep his hands off me, Lisa. I think you're luckier than you know. He hit me, Amy. Yeah, but he was drunk, right? Yeah, maybe if he just wouldn't get drunk, then he wouldn't be rough about it. Maybe if I didn't jump from his touches, maybe if I could get myself to feel like I used to feel. I stare at her across the table. I don't really expect her to have answers, but I feel my eyes pleading for anything she can offer. Hey, it's gonna be okay. She comes over and wraps her arms half around the chair, half around me. I lean into her shoulder and scrunch my nose so I won't cry. She smells of frankincense and lavender. I've got to go to work, she says. Oh, how is work? I compose myself. Work is great and awful, she says, standing up and clearing her dishes. I think James is really starting to notice me, if you know what I mean. But Melissa just started her maternity leave, so I have a lot of slack to pick up. Now I understand the perfect hair, the fitted floral dress that still looks professional but not a smidgen less flattering for it. Oh, interesting. I crunch my bacon. I thought you liked Adam. I did, she winks. But look, I really gotta go. Stay here as long as you need. I will. I trudge through sloppy, rainy mud up the hill to our house. My ankle boots are trying to slip off of me, but I didn't want to park in the driveway. I had to make sure he wasn't here first. So I parked down the hill around a corner, and I'm taking the path through the grass. No one is parked. I let my shaky breath escape. He's done this before, overwhelmed me, scared me away, but this was the first time I've had a mark, the first time he's hit me. I don't really know what I'm supposed to do next. Coming home to make a grab for what I can call mine feels right, though. I press my forehead to the cool glass of the narrow window alongside the front door. My breath fogs my view, but I don't see any lights. I don't hear any sounds. I turn my key and head inside, leaving my muddy boots on the rug. I advance to the bedroom, our bedroom, or so I tell myself. He must be at work, like Amy. It seems people who own their own selves are all there. How ironic. He's a civil engineer who works under another civil engineer, which I guess makes him a glorified construction worker. Today in the rain, he probably gets to work inside an office, though. My clothes are on the floor, hanging in the closet and stacked in drawers, but I grab from the dresser first because he won't notice those are missing. I stuff a few panties, pajamas, jeans, shorts, and t-shirts into my duffel. I glance around. A red dress is shoved between his suits in our closet. I think I might need that too. On the drive back to Amy's, the news rages. Occupy Wall Street gains momentum as an estimated 1,000 people now crowd the famous street, demanding financial equality. It's weird to think about all that's going on in the world outside of my own bubble. I can't imagine a single person I know who would go there and do that. Least of all, my mom. That reminds me I should call her before the rumor mill goes crazy. Mom, do you ever wish you had stayed at your job? I ask when she answers my call. Lisa, hi honey, is everything okay? Matt said he heard from Amy that you stayed with her last night. I knew it wouldn't take long. I'm fine, Mom. I was just thinking about things like money and wondering if you wish you'd kept your job after you married Dad. Or are you having money problems? I just finished a Bible study on money with your father. Maybe I can send it to you. No, we're not having money problems, Mom. Thank you, though. I'm just wondering if I shouldn't make some money, too. I know my home ec degree won't get me anywhere special, but there are probably some jobs. Oh, sweetie, when I left my job, it was because I had a much bigger purpose than delivering mail. I was preparing to be your mother. Oh, couldn't you do both? Not with my whole heart, honey. Your dad made enough money, and God gave him that responsibility and authority. She pauses. I've never heard you talk this way. What's going on? I know, I sigh. I guess I'm starting to wonder if this is it. Will I ever be able to stand on my own feet? You know, to bring more to the marriage and all that. I feel I have to give a reason. Oh, I understand. I wondered that once too. But staying home was an act of obedience, an act of love. Ruth, Mary, and Esther, all the best women in the Bible, they all changed their whole lives to be wives or mothers. That's sweet, I say. I'm not a mother, though. I wonder if that matters. How is Dad, anyway? Still the best man I know. Is everything really okay? Why'd you stay with Amy? Yeah, we just had fun catching up. Look, I'm gonna let you go. Love you, Mom. Oh, okay. I love you too, Lisa Bug. You're still here, Amy says when she walks in the door. Well, hi to you too. You said stay as long as I need. Of course. She eyes me up and down as she wrenches her heels off her feet. Have you talked to Jason today? No, I went to the house and grabbed some clothes, though. Oh, so you're staying for a while. Is that okay? Of course. She keeps saying that. But, she pauses, what's your plan? I don't think I want to go back, Amy. I hadn't said it aloud yet. Now that I have, I feel a knot of guilt in my gut. I see myself as a Delilah, a betrayer. But then I think of Rahab, after helping the Jews, free of her misguided loyalties. Which would I be? Hell, and I just wanted to come home from work and relax. She walks past me towards her bedroom. I think she's crashing out after a long day of work. I don't always see the run-down, grumpy Amy, but I know she struggles. Please do, don't let me stop you. I sigh. If I start paying for a hotel room, Jason will cancel that card, and I don't have a clue where that would leave me. I have to figure something out, but my stomach beckons me again. I scan her fridge contents while she's changing, and a giant jar of whole dill pickles calls to me. I hope she won't mind. The next morning, he calls. I've just finished vomiting in the toilet when I hear my phone. I should have checked the expiration date on those pickles. Or maybe I shouldn't have ordered my tikka masala so spicy for dinner. Jason, I say, preparing to push this conversation off for another time, but he jumps in. Hey, I am so sorry, Lisa. What? You are? Why? I wasn't expecting that. I should not have slapped you. I was just mad that you don't want me to touch you. I mean, I'm your husband. His voice starts to get gravelly, but he stops and calms himself. I let it get the best of me. When are you coming back? I pause. I don't know. Look, I am so sorry. I didn't react right. I won't do it again, I promise. I love you. I know. I love you too. Do you remember our wedding vows? Which part? When I said, whenever I get it wrong, I promise to make it right. Lisa, I meant that. I want to make it right. I can remember him on that day 2 years ago. Damp eyes and dimples, the sun glowing behind him. I don't think I could have loved him more in that moment if I tried. When are you coming back? He breaks the silence. I don't know. Tomorrow? What the hell am I thinking? Okay, that's great. Hey, we have a lot to work on, don't we? Look, I'll work on my temper. I know I really need to. Will you work on being more affectionate with me? Maybe there's something you can read or think about during the day that will help you be excited for when I come home. Yeah, I guess that seems fair. And I know you're not ready yet, but maybe you can apologize too. What? For leaving, running away from our problems. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll think about that. I feel the blood draining from my face. But this has to be the right thing to do. I have to at least try before I make up my mind to leave. Maybe we could talk to someone. I bet Delilah and Samson never tried couples therapy. Too much power is owned by the richest 1%. We are the 99%. The radio is still fixated on this Occupy Wall Street story. Are people actually worried, I wonder? I think we all know nothing will change. Maybe some small casualties will happen in the streets, but life will continue how it continues. When I pull into the driveway, I feel a wave of relief wash over me. This is my driveway. This is my house, my husband. I remember when we bought this house together. I jumped in his arms and he carried me across the threshold while I stretched out my arm and snapped a selfie. I was so happy to be held, so unafraid to leave any hints of dreams of another life behind. I knew my calling and I was ready for it. I can be there again. And thanks to what a wet stick told me last night, the feeling of uncertainty can be a distant memory. I thud the driver's seat door closed, and I think how excited he must be to hear the echo of that from inside the house. Heaving my duffel onto my shoulder, I also wonder how long before the doctor declares I shouldn't be lifting it. And I feel my cheeks grow warm and smile. I can't wait to tell Jason. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Luria. Next up, we will have Clayton Bulliard.
All right. Let's see, my voice carrying okay? Take that as a yes. This piece is titled Francesca Unveiled. Francesca Basile was born under a harvest moon. The sign of the owl was in the stars over her birth, shining down its wisdom and promising the family good fortune to come. Paola, her mother, came through the birthing with ease that surprised both parents. Francesca's brother had raged into the world, and recovery afterward had been slow. But with Francesca, it was as though the child could not wait to be free and taste the air. Those early days hold few memories for Francesca, wrapped as they are in the diaphanous sheen of infancy. They are white and gilded with a golden warmth, a time when love was bountiful and truth was certain. The farm was a happy place then, and she would bounce on her mother's knee or be spun around in the arms of Angelo, her brother. But, as is true of all things, this time came to an end. Francesca grew quickly, and after 2 or perhaps 3 years, she had ceased to crawl and began to walk. Those first tremulous steps were a thing of beauty, the purest of achievements, and in celebration, the flowing raiment of the toddler was removed, and Francesca was given the suit. Memory had yet to form secure borders, and even now there is little she can recall of this incident. But what she does remember is vivid. The suit was hot and leathery, wrought of flesh and full of quills that first scratched, then pierced her skin as it was tightened, enclosing her limbs and at last securing her head until naught but her eyes were visible. Her father needed more hands to sow the fields and mend the fences, and so the suit added to Francesca's stature and increased her strength. Walking now was more difficult as her limbs were extended and foreign, and she had to start the process anew, struggling for each step and crying at the sting of the quills. But she was of an age now, it seemed, when tears were no longer tolerable, and so she was reprimanded by her father and brother for this practice. The suit was tight, and tears escaped with difficulty, so Francesca learned quickly to stem the tide lest she drown. As she learned to speak and communicate, she came to realize that her family didn't regard the suit as strange. Francis, she was called, and she was taught to be a dutiful son. From her father, she learned what it was to be a man of duty and discipline. From her mother, she was taught to want a wife and family and to work to sustain her progeny. Angelo taught her to run and to jump, to use the suit's potential in contests of strength. Soon the suit was a part of her, and the discomfort became a quiet hum. Before long, she forgot there was ever a time when she was free of it, and happily so, for the memory of freedom only served to aggravate the wounds of incarceration. But as she grew, and the suit with her, she would occasionally dream of the owl in the stars, and the feeling of the breeze on her skin, and awaken to despair, pulling on the folds of flesh that were not her own. But always the dream would fade as the demands of the day called her back to the present, and she would help her father with the harvest, or fetch buckets of water so that her mother may do the washing. And so life continued until Francesca began the climb to adulthood. Angelo, who was several years her senior, discovered a love of wine and spent ever more time away from the farm, and Francesca's father was more demanding of her to make up the deficit. Then one harvest season, when Francesca was 14, Angelo met his end at a neighbor's farm after drinking too much and wandering into the river. The current of the water wheel pulled him along and under, and his companions didn't notice his absence until it was too late. This added another dimension to the suit that was Francesca's burden, as her grieving parents now called her not only Francis, but Angelo, missing so much their firstborn son that they didn't notice their error when it occurred. Francesca didn't mind it terribly. One false name was as good as another, and she could think of nothing else to do to ease her family's suffering. But time bore them all forward, just as the river had borne forth Angelo's limp form. Francesca's father focused on his toil, and her mother shut herself away, and the family never spoke of it, as with all things that were unpleasant. As Francesca approached her 18th year, she had grown closer with the other youths of nearby farms, and when she wasn't working, she passed the time in their company. The suit was her identity, and though none seemed to question its appearance, her friends did at times question its symptoms, as the compression on her ears made her slow to hear and slow to respond. Speech was distressing, as the quills pricked her throat and made her voice gravelly and rough, and so she often chose silence instead, though she was still quick to laugh. On one summer night, their day's toils spent, Francesca's companions suggested they take to the river, and under the smiling moon, the youths disrobed and ran to the warm water where it was shallow and calm. For a moment, Francesca felt liberated, but soon she was frozen. Never before had she seen others unclad, and as the peals of laughter and sounds of splashing water crashed around her, she noted her companions as if for the first time. Her eyes fell upon Gabriella, her form lithe and curved, and Francesca looked down at the suit, her hands moving to her own chest, hard and flat from long labor and light meals. And in that moment, the suit seemed to loosen, and the sudden departure of pressure drew a gasp from her chest. But then it tightened like a vice, and the quills dug deeper than ever before. Francesca gathered her clothes and fled home, where she plunged her head into the mule's drinking trough and came up shuddering. And as the water stilled, she gazed into her reflection for what she realized was the first time. Always before she had averted her gaze, but now she forced herself to look and wept. The face wasn't hers. The hard jaw, the bristles on her cheeks, those were Angelo's. In her brow, that jutted ever so slightly forward, and the thick hair swept back from it, she could see her father. But she couldn't see herself. And the numbness of years fled then, and never returned, leaving despair in its place, and an ache that she could hardly contain, an ache to be truly unclad, an ache to be free. She lay back on the grass then, gazing up at the night sky, and the sign of the owl was there beside the moon. Clouds moved before it, but its eyes bore down, and she traced her fingers over the flesh of the suit, coming to the nape of her neck, and there she felt a ridge, a seam. She knew then that she had felt it before, and always her fingers had passed over it, afraid of what it might mean. But she wasn't afraid now. And in that moment of certitude of who she was, she heard a sound, a chorus of voices in the west, low and light, emanating from the distant trees. And Francesca arose and followed the music, feeling for the first time light on her feet. The chorus grew louder as she passed through the canopy of trees, intuitively stepping around brambles and borne ever forward by the melody, until she came upon a clearing that blazed with the warmth of a bonfire. The trees were parted to the sky above, and moonlight fell onto a pool enclosed in stone, a pool that shone with silver. There were others there, dancing about the flames, the ones to whom the singing voices belonged, and at her coming they closed around her in a tight embrace. At their touch, the suit's quills softened and withdrew, and she felt the cool breeze over her neck, where the seam sprang open like a flower in spring. The others led her to the pool and helped her in, as the loosening suit deprived her of all grace. Their hands peeled away the prison of flesh, first from her shoulders, then, bit by bit, from her limbs. The silver waters rushed in to balm her skin, marred as it was with pinpricks and deeper wounds. And as the last vestiges of the suit were peeled away, she finally felt the cool night air on her face. She could see the others clearly now, the constellations of scars on their flesh that mirrored her own. And she knew then that she was home at last, and she wept for the first time with joy. And they danced around the fire and rose towards the sky, the wind at their backs. Many years passed from that night. Francesca didn't know how many, nor did she care, for she was free. Some of the others had fallen away, been claimed by the world for daring emancipation, and given to the gallows or the cleansing flames of the righteous. But still others had come and cast aside their suits, and so it would continue for as long as she had a voice to sing.
Great. Thank you, Clayton. And last but not least, we have Piper Stutzman. And then we will have plenty of time for questions. So.
This one doesn't have a title. It's based off of the tape recordings of Samuel Bick. Yeah. I'm driving towards the airport, Burger King in my passenger seat. I think about Nixon, the president, how I had voted for him, but yet he's lost my faith. I reach to open my glove box and take out a tape recorder. I bring it to my mouth and press play. Have it your way, have it your way, I sing, getting distracted by the song. Dick, you still there, babe? I say, getting back on track. Sorry about that. 10 miles from the airport. I'm starting to lose it here. I ramble on about his public service for a while, and I laugh. And you know what? This cracks me up. I voted for you. Yeah, I gave you my vote, my sacred democratic trust. And you know what you did? You pissed all over it. You piss all over yourselves. You piss all over me. The airport enters my view. Rage continues to fill me. We want to make things better? How? Let's hold an election. Great. The Democrat says he'll fix everything the Republicans fucked up. The Republican says he'll fix everything the Democrats fucked up. Who's telling us the truth? Who's lying? Someone's lying. Who? We read, we guess, we argue, but deep down we know that we don't know. How can we? Oil embargoes, megatons, holes in the ozone. Who can understand this crap? I see the parking lot and I enter it. I park my car and I grab the recording tape. And when we realize they're lying, really realize it in our gut, then we get scared. We get terrified like children waking in the dark. We don't know where we are. I had a bad dream. Mommy, Daddy, Sammy had a nightmare. A tear rolls down my eye. And then Daddy comes in and takes me in his arms and says, "It's okay, Sammy. Daddy's here. I love you, kid. Your mommy doesn't, but I do." And when Mommy comes in and holds me tight and says, "I got you, Boobala. I'm here for you. Your daddy isn't, but I am." And then where are we? Who do we believe? Who do we trust? What do we do? I pause the recording and get out of the car. The air is thick. The sound of airplanes fill my ears. I bring the recorder back up to my mouth and make my decision. We do the only thing we can do. We kill the president. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Piper. So Michael Kelker is going to come around with, he's got a wireless mic, so if people have questions they would like to pose to the panelists as a whole or an individual person, just a reminder, we would like to keep this about the questions about writing as protest, about protest in general, as opposed to necessarily the specific subjects that the writers are writing about, unless you want them to expand on what they were trying to do in their pieces and that sort of thing. So just raise your hand and Michael will happily come dashing about.
That's right. Watch me dash, even at age 58.
You're pretty spry for your age, Michael. I've seen you rush around with that microphone.
Yes, I have. All right. Grace Moser.
I just want to say thank you for sharing your writing with me. I love listening to people read their work out loud, and I think I need to come to one of the coffee houses too. So my question is more like, what motivated you? What protest or change were you trying to address in your work? I'm just curious. Because I was really interested in the Occupy movement and like how that was in the background of what you were writing about, and I'm interested in what the suit represented. So I'm just, I'm a history teacher, so I know a little bit about Nixon, and I love the ending to your story, by the way. So I'm just curious about where you were coming from, what inspired you in the stories that you did write.
I guess I'll go first. So the Occupy Wall Street movement is obviously like a protest against, wealth inequality. And I think there's a definite inequality in the marriage in this story. And I feel like I and maybe a lot of people were raised in a culture that sort of encouraged that and just didn't really mind if women were victims as a byproduct of that teaching because it was holier, so it's good. And so, yeah, it's a protest against that whole mentality. I totally relate to that. I grew up Christian fundamentalist. Yeah. So, like, smiling at the biblical, references. Because I remember those, like, I was
Okay. So with mine, and this is going to be really difficult to keep this apolitical because it's kind of tied in, which is ironic because if you know me, I hate politics. But the suit most directly is meant to represent gender dysphoria. But I wanted to, where this originated from is I wanted to write a fairy tale. I have for a while because I took a fairy tale class last year and it really spoke to me. But I wanted to leave that open as much as possible to be relatable by a more broad audience, because gender dysphoria can look like a lot of different things, but also there's a multiplicity of individuals represented there towards the end, and it's really just about oppression in the familial sense, where you're raised to be a certain way in finding your own identity. So ultimately, the suit kind of represents anybody who's feeling like they have to live a lie, whatever that might look like. We all kind of have different closets of our own, and there's some great speeches about that that would go into far more detail and way more eloquently than I could. And the ending was kind of meant to be sort of witchcraft and finding your way to free thinking and chosen family. So. I was going to say, it's really powerful to describe the suit as being painful. Yeah. Is that general discomfort, the twinges of pain, and then you get used to it and acclimated to it, and it becomes the new normal, because like a fish doesn't notice water, the same kind of way. And then just like the foreignness of the limbs and the way it manifests and is recognized in some ways but never directly seen. So I tried to articulate that to the best of my ability.
Mine is more of, oh Lord, sorry. Well, obviously it's about, like, this actually happened, and, oh, Lord. Sorry, the reason why I chose to write about a person who attempted to assassinate a president is because there's all sorts of different, like, types of protest, and there are good protesting and there is bad protesting, aka killing people. So I just went with this particular story because I am a theater kid, and there is a musical called Assassins that has this monologue that takes the tapes of Samuel Burke and puts it into this 20-minute monologue. I paraphrased, as obviously, but it takes that monologue and, yeah. So I mean, the point of this was showing the different type, like, how far protesting can go. Yeah.
Good question, and great to hear from you. Who else with a question? I'd like everybody to know that the college's literary journal, Mid-Rivers Review, features a section of poetry from Loria Harris, and you can access that material right now if you want. stchaz.edu/Mid-Rivers-Review. Mid-Rivers Review, volume 2022, has been posted to that webpage. You can read the PDF for free, and it'll also come out in a physical edition in about 3 weeks. So check out her poetry. We heard prose from her today, but we have a special section of her poetry in the new Mid-Rivers Review. So make sure you check that out. And also come to Coffee House. Jeff, when is the first Coffee House? October 6th, in the space right outside this auditorium door in that lounge area. I just got done hosting Coffee House for the last 4 or 5 years. It's now turned over to Jeff Miller, and I'm still going to attend because they're just great sessions. So if you feel the need to write your own original material, bring it out. They're really great events. Who else has a question for our panelists?
I do. I'm going to be the annoying teacher that asks my
Please
students
do.
questions.
Yes.
Because I don't have to answer it. I'm curious if you could talk about what was the germination point of the things that you wrote? Not the same as what were you trying to say there, but how did you get to what you got to, if that makes sense? Whatever order you want. Yeah, for all of you. I mean, mine was easy. I read somebody else's work, so that was really easy.
I'm trying to remember, actually. I think there was a prompt. I do know that I wrote it once, and then there was a prompt to start it over, beginning with the action, like go straight into the action. And
That was me, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
It's always you.
Yeah.
I picked up like 4 of your prompts in that story.
Yep. They're good prompts. But yeah, so that's how the beginning came about. I'll have to say something again if I remember more about how it germinated.
That's fine.
So with mine, this is a subject that's interested me for a while, and I think I started to say kind of where the seed was initially planted. It came from learning deeply about fairy tales and all their different histories, and the specific kind of content where it finally like clicked, where there's a variation of the Cinderella tale type. There's a couple different versions, and there's like the donkey skin and cat skin family of Cinderella stories, and there's an old Egyptian story called The Princess and the Suit of Skins. I did not rip it off necessarily. There's inspiration taken, but this is how you can see a story that inspires you to do your own thing with it and become something completely new. And I hope that I made something new. But I've been trying to think of a way to express this in sort of a safe fairy tale fantasy land that makes it a little bit detached from the current political climate, where we can kind of play with these ideas and make them relatable in a general way and bring people together, hopefully, rather than further alienate like these issues tend to do. So really, I'd say the main catalyst of the story was reading another story, which is often the case for me.
Well, I actually struggled to write this for the past 2 days.
I bullied Piper into doing this.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. But I really struggled. But then driving here from Breadco, I had my CD in with the Assassin soundtrack, and I was like, wow, this really relates to the topic at hand. So I decided to look up the actual tapes of Samuel Burke, and it's really hard to take dialogue and put like movement into it. So I had to, basically I took the dialogue and I stuck it in, not all of it obviously, like I said earlier, but it was hard to that's essentially where I got to writing this, is I was struggling for a prompt, and I was listening to a CD. I was like, oh, this is perfect.
I promise my prompts are not as bad as they're making them sound. So.
Reality. Sorry. I said I'm a history teacher and never heard of Samuel Burke. Is that his name?
Yes, it's also spelled with a Y, B-Y-R-K.
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
weird.
it's spelled a little bit different. It took me a second. It pulled up like some hedge fund manager first when I was Googling. But I'm really intrigued by the idea of taking something that's actually fiction or nonfiction and turning it into, like, it's creative nonfiction, and I really enjoyed it. I think it's like a really powerful way to connect something that's not necessarily like an interesting topic. History can be boring, but then to do this in a really relatable way, like kind of like looking at the darker side of protest and when it's taken too far. So I was just gonna say I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed all of them. I mean, and I was also, it's such a neat exercise to step outside of my analytical box of how I normally think about things and then looking at it from a different perspective of creative writing. So I just really enjoyed it. Thank you.
I have a question for you.
You were
Sorry, I already
you're
forgot your
fine.
name.
For
I'm really bad about name. In your story, when our character was swimming with the rest of their friends, I remember you had said the suit was like tight around their ears. What I have like a general understanding of gender dysmorphia.
dysphoria.
Sorry,
No,
dysphoria.
you're good. There's body dysmorphia and gender dysphoria, and they get conflated
Yeah, sorry.
quite
sorry.
frequently. So
Sorry.
But they are
Sorry, I
distinct.
used the wrong word. I was a little unsure about the hearing part of that. That was my only.
that was sort of an abstraction because again, it works differently for everybody. There's no one unified trans narrative, and there's also no one unified way that people experience any sort of mental distress, but to me that was kind of a moment of dissociation. It was kind of how I was trying to express that, because like I don't know if I imagine everybody here has experienced something at least relatively traumatic, because life is traumatic, but there's moments where your body kind of shuts down and there's maybe ringing in your ears and maybe your eyes go distant. That's kind of what I was trying to make that mean. And I was trying to express it in a way that it was a persistent experience, although there's moments where it would lessen and moments where it would increase, which is why I had the suit kind of expanding and contracting throughout the story. But that's primarily what that was representing, is those moments of dissociation where you just can't quite hear and you can't quite respond, where that happens as sort of a trauma reaction. There's fight and there's flight, but then there's freeze and fawn. So that was kind of more representing freeze, if that makes sense. Yeah.
think we have someone right there, and then someone in the back in the middle, Michael.
I can never decide where this is supposed to go.
So I had a question for all of you. And when writing your pieces, did you write from a place of relating to your characters or story? And if not, was that a challenge for you?
Like I was saying, I do relate to a lot of, like the way that Lisa was raised, like just to expect herself to, you know, submit to her husband, everything will be perfect. I'm very lucky I do not have an abusive husband, so I don't relate to that area. But I did grow up seeing examples of people fall into abusive relationships, trying to just be the perfect godly woman. So yes, I feel like there's a lot that I relate to in here.
I feel like the answer to your question for every writer, for every story, is always going to be a strange homogeny of yes and no. Because to me, every character that you write inevitably has a part of yourself put into it. And if it doesn't, then it's probably going to be one of those things you revise out because it's going to feel really flat. You know what I mean? So with this character, there's a tremendous amount of things that are derived from personal experience, or if not direct personal experience, taken from empathy, you know, from other experiences I've had secondhand through peers, through seeing stories, through experiencing other narratives, you know, even in media. So while writing characters that are deeply personal, I feel like I do detach myself and distance myself from those characters because it's a way of kind of working through my own experiences in a roundabout way. It's kind of like if you have a dream about something you've done in the past where you can confront it because it's not real, you know? So there's a little bit of that creative distance you have to put between it. But I feel like it's always that balance of direct representation of yourself with that disconnection, and that's just kind of like that flow state that engages whenever you start really getting into the process of writing.
For me, like even though it's a like kind of like a nonfiction sort of piece, I do kind of relate to him in a sense of like that like betrayal, because like not even with politics, but in general, like being betrayed by like a parental figure or just someone in their in my life or his life. It's, I don't know, it's hard to go through, and like of course I did not deal with it that way. But like I feel like I do relate to him in a sense of have felt betrayal before, and like being told one's right, one's wrong, and then the other one saying the other one's right. I mean, I'm right and the other one's wrong, like vice, you know. So yeah.
I think that's a really good question that you ask. Not that I wrote something of my own, but if I can add just one little thing, I think, you know, part of the reason I want to read stuff is I know there's a couple creative writing classes here today, so imparting my deep wisdom, bonus experience for you. Just kidding, it's not that smart. Every writer leaves pieces of them, I think, in anything they write, you know? And any writer who tells you that's not the case is either lying or a bad writer. You know, whether it is this character is me, or this is an experience I've had or not, there are pieces of ourselves that we leave behind, right? Like you said, Piper, you know, I'm glad to know that you have never thought to pursue assassinating the president. But those feelings of that you're channeling something that you have experienced as a human being, right, into this particular sort of situation. Or like you said, Loria, it's good to know that your husband is not abusive. But that you've seen and felt that in your life in these other indirect ways, right? Same thing with what Clayton was saying. And I think that's what writers do, right? Is we really are at the same time trying to do two things in anything that writers write. And one is to make the familiar unfamiliar, and the other is to make the unfamiliar familiar, right? And you somehow try to do both of those at the same time. And I think this is tied to that, right? That, you know, you write what you know, but you also move out of what you know. Because if you only write what you know, that's really boring, right? And trying to push into other things, and also not be the people that you put on the page, right? You're creating these other human beings that may have tidbits of you, and you need that for the authenticity of who they are, but you also are not just writing about yourself, right? Yeah. It was a great question to think about.
Hi, this question's for Loria. I had a question about the ending. I really liked how you portrayed it. I was wondering what made you settle upon that, because normally, like a lot of times with like other like writings, people choose to do the ending where it goes against the grain, the person stands up, and it's usually like the ending that makes people happy. I was just curious what inspired you to settle on that.
I just want to say, I saw the moment you realized what was going on as she was reading.
Yeah, I think creating this ending, I think, to bring back the keyword protest, like I wanted to inspire feelings of protest in the reader. Like I didn't want people to feel okay with how things go for a lot of people, because this situation happens. But does that answer your question? Okay.
Well, and also, like, a lot of people who are stuck in abusive relationships don't get that escape, right?
Right,
Like, it continues, and
Especially when like a pregnancy comes into the picture,
Right.
and
well, and like I don't remember if this takes place in Missouri or not. A woman who is pregnant can't finalize divorce while she is pregnant in the state of Missouri.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, do people not know that? Is that not common knowledge? Yeah. So, yeah, if a divorce cannot be finalized in the state of Missouri if one of the participants, is that the right word, is currently pregnant.
Huh.
And I won't get into more of the absurd reasons why, but that's the case. But it speaks. But I think the ending of your story, it speaks to that. You know, we all love a happy ending, right? But a lot of times, you know, life, not to start winding down on a sour note, life doesn't always end happily, right? Like that. And so sometimes that ending of that, and that trapped feeling, right, where she's putting on this sort of face of it's all okay, is also that psychology of having to convince yourself of that, right? Yeah. Yeah.
We're getting such good questions. One from the back.
I also had a question for you. So when you were talking about when the main character, she was at her friend's house, after smoking, she was in a bubble full of water and she was reaching her hand through. Was your metaphor like supposed to be anxiety, or was it something else?
It was mostly foreshadowing the pregnancy. She realized she was in like a sac, like an amniotic sac, and yeah. But I definitely, it can certainly be interpreted that way, I think, as well.
Very good. Thank you for that question. Anyone else?
Oh,
Yes,
we got
we
one.
do.
We got one.
Hold tight.
Sorry, this is like, I don't know, not even really that much of a question, I guess, but I don't even know how I want to word this. If you were, I guess, to almost write more, do you think you would just leave it as like where you stopped at, or do you think like you would continue on like more with your story, like each one of you, like would you probably go into like, I don't know, just would you think you'd continue like the story on? I'm not going to say like how would you continue it on, like I don't want you to have to think about that, but just do you think you liked it where you left it off, or do each one of you think like you would have added a little bit more if you could, I guess?
It's like, is there a next version of the story or something like that?
How do you know when you're done? Yeah.
That's both of those are loaded questions. I feel like no story that we do is ever done, and there's a lot more I wanted to put in this personally than the space and time allowed. For I had to keep it short-ish. There were other endings. There was more meat in the middle, spreading out the metaphors, but I would have wanted more time to refine that probably before I shared it. And there's a good quote about revision. I think it's Jerry Jenkins. He says, stop revising when you stop making it better and are just making it different. So I feel like we can keep doing that forever and ever, but at a certain point, you just got to be like, I got to walk away from this for a while, and maybe you'll come back to it and expand on it, but I feel like no story's ever really done. You know, you can keep going for forever.
I feel like I like where mine ends. I feel pretty certain about that would be, I would keep that as the ending, but I may continue to, you know, add more details and fill out some of the scenes a little more. Time will tell.
Well, I mean, at first, I didn't realize mine was so short. I think I could have done the whole, I think I could have stuck in the whole tape, all the dialogue from the tape if I wanted to. But as far as continuing it, if I were to continue it, it would just be Burke going to the airport, and then, you know, what he does at the airport. I don't know, he kills a police officer or whatever, he gets wounded, and then he kills himself. But I would either continue and then end there, or I would just leave it, because I think stopping it at the line that I stopped at, we do what we can do. We kill the president. I feel like it's just so powerful. So
You could do some interesting timey-wimey stuff and go out of sequence and end there, maybe.
yeah, that's also true.
It's an interesting project. Yeah, what Clayton said, I think, resonates a lot. We had a funny thing happen in class this morning
I almost mentioned that.
where I had them reading a short story that there's a version of available online, and somehow in the bowels of my Canvas class, Clayton found a PDF version that I had uploaded years ago, and the PDF is from the short story collection that this story eventually appeared in. It appeared in this website first, and I thought it's the same story, but it's a writer named Ramona Osabel, had changed the last two paragraphs. So he read, and I have read, a different version of the story than the rest of the class read. I mean, it's essentially the same story. Not really anything significant changes in it, but that shows you, so she had this story published in a pretty major magazine, and then when she published her short story collection, she had changed the ending slightly. And years ago, when I was an undergraduate student, I still remember a writer I went to Truman State University for my undergraduate degree, and we had a visiting writer who came. He was in a room of this sort to do a public reading of some of his work, and he had a photocopy of a story of his that was in a collection of stories that he had published. That particular story had already been published in a magazine and was in this book. And a few minutes before he starts reading, he's up there making edits to the photocopy. And I was like, but you've not just had this story published in a magazine, you had a publisher publish it. And when that happens, and I'm going through this right now, you read your own manuscript like 3 more times with notes from 3 separate people. You kind of hate your own work by the time you're done with it. So he'd clearly already done this, he had revised this thing at least 4 times since it had initially at some point been published, and he's still up there changing things, all right? So I think that speaks to exactly what you're talking about, Clayton. Like, I think there are very few writers that feel like the work is ever done. Now, whether you feel like, okay, this is all of the scenes and all the details I want, maybe you get to that point, but in terms of like, oh, this sentence should sound different than it does, I think it's exactly what you're talking about, right? Like, if you're just making it different, when are you done making it better and are just making it different, right? And sometimes those can be the same thing, because as you write more and more, your voice as a writer changes, and who you are, because who you are changes, right? And so that, I think, is also part of it, is that, you know, it'd be interesting several years from now for each of you to look back at this piece of writing. If you're anything like most writers, you'll hate the thought of doing that. And see how your voice has changed since now. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add, this one was published in a community college magazine for community college students, and I almost wanted to read it out of that because I thought that was pretty cool, but I definitely made a few changes, and then about an hour before coming here, I made more and printed it off again, so
Yeah.
yes.
Constant process.
Yep.
See, I think we have time for maybe one more question, if anybody has one. Or not.
That was a great session, people.
Yeah, I would like us to thank and applaud our panelists one last time. This is not an easy thing to do. I didn't even do it. So thank you all very much for coming, and thank you, Michael, for another great Democracy Days. I know there's one more panel and then a film screening tonight, right?
Yes, there's a political parody performer at 2:30 p.m. in the Fine Arts Building main stage. And then we have a film tonight, the Kinlock doc, 7 p.m. right here, and that will conclude Democracy Days 2022. Thank you all for being here. You were a great audience for these writers.
Yes, thank you for all your questions.